What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Body Lock. It's Ant Walker here with Mike Fiedel and Pat Auger. So we've got to discuss a few things that have kind of been rattling the MMA world. As of this recording, UFC 250 was last night, so it's Sunday. But the weekend wasn't just filled with drama as far as the fights were concerned. On social media, man, fireworks were flying. And it kind of goes into this overall narrative where it seems to be a general level of discontent among some of the bigger names in the promotion. A lot of complaints about pay, compensation, and whatnot. So let's just jump right into it. Masvidal, Jones, McGregor's so-called retirement, Cejudo's retirement. We had Gray Maynard, we had Cub Swanson. We've had a lot, and former fighters. Have jumped on this as well, and people have left the UFC roster since. Are the dominoes finally falling? Are we seeing some sort of, dare I say, unionization of fighters right now?
I think at this point it's a little too early to say that, but I would say that this is probably the biggest movement for fighters as a collective in the most recent memory that I can think of. I mean, you obviously had some of those failed groups where you had, Cain Velasquez, George St. Pierre, TJ Dillashaw, meet up with Bjorn Revney to try and kind of had a fighters association and things of that nature. But those petered out pretty quickly and never really went anywhere. This is current big name stars who are being vocal about the issues, saying we're not getting paid enough, and are retiring. I mean, you got Jones, Cejudo, and apparently McGregor all in the span of a couple of weeks. Masvidal clearly seems like he'd be okay with retiring if he had enough money or if he didn't want to fight based on the issues, but he's still pushing to keep going. But it certainly looks like it's the biggest push in a long time. That being said, there's still a lot of hurdles that come with this. Just being certified to be able to unionize from the NLRB is going to be a huge mountain to climb, especially with the current head who's in until December of 2022. He's notorious anti-union. He's done a lot of union busting with the airlines back in the 80s under the Reagan administration. Going to be very hard to get certified in the proper way in order to actually form a union for the fighters, even if this starts to happen. But it definitely looks like it's starting to push into a movement for unionization, and what it ends up being in the end, whether it's a fighters association or an actual union, I don't know. But I would say it seems to be the closest it's been in a very, very long time.
So Michael, I'm gonna pivot to you really quickly here. Jorge Masvidal has been the most confrontational throughout this whole ordeal. And that's saying a lot, considering that John Jones was butting heads with Dana just days ago. And if I'm remembering correctly, we've talked about that as well. So now that Masvidal has dropped scorched earth, let's kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts of what he was talking about. I mean, we're hearing 8-fight deals being discussed. He's got 7 fights left on it. We're seeing some leftover, things in the air from the BMF title as well. So Mike, if you would do the folks a favor here, just unpack a little bit of what Masvidal was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jorge Masvidal has taken to Twitter lately, and he's really shared a lot of complaints and a lot of disagreements with the way that his pay is structured and the pay of MMA fighters more broadly when it comes to the UFC. Now, he cited the 18% figure that is from Bloody Elbow's reporting of financials that have been leaked from the antitrust lawsuit, and that essentially means that the UFC is pocketing roughly 82% of the revenue that the entire entity generates, whereas fighters as a collective group are only taking away 18%. Now, Masvidal has taken issue with this percentage, looking at leagues like the NFL and the NBA and the MLB, in which the revenue split is much closer to 50-50 between the owner of the league, the owners of the league, and the fighters and the players, versus the UFC's, where it's more an 80-20 split. Now, Masvidal's in a prime position, as we discussed, to be a voice in this kind of fight. He's someone who, outside of perhaps McGregor, the John Jones, as we discussed earlier, and fighters who are in that stratosphere, Masvidal is one of the biggest draws in the sport right now. Of course, the BMF title, the win over Nate Diaz, and obviously the finishes of Darren Till and Ben Askren that put him on the map as far as mainstream concerns. He's done a lot of media, a lot of mainstream media. More specifically, he appeared on SportsCenter with Kenny Mayne and spoke about the pay discrepancy that he believes exists in the UFC, talking specifically about how he believes he is worth more, but his bargaining position with the UFC at the negotiating table is significantly less leverage than they have. Now, I'm on Jorge Masvidal's Twitter right now. I'm going to read one of his tweets. He says, quote, "I'm in a contract that I had to take to get paid. Same way I got a new contract to fight Till, then a new contract to fight Nate. They keep extending the amount of fights to my contract to keep me locked up. And when I say I only want a 4-fight contract, it's take it or leave it. The negotiation is take it or leave it. If I lose, you can cut me and not pay out the rest of my contract. But if I win, I'm not in the position to renegotiate the contract." So this is Masvidal essentially saying, I'm in a position where if I want something, I can't get it. But if the UFC wants something, they can. And I think that speaks to the larger issue here, which is that the fighters as individuals, and of course, as they're currently classified as independent contractors, have very little leverage with the UFC. The UFC has a lot of power. And of course, those in support of the antitrust lawsuit would claim that's because the UFC uses monopsony and monopoly power in order to extort that leverage over the fighters. So this is a very interesting situation, and it's definitely the highest profile group of fighters in recent memory to come out against the UFC in a leverage situation. You've got Henry Cejudo, a 2-weight division champion, now only one at the time, retiring at the age of 33 in what we believe may have been a negotiation tactic. Of course, his coach and manager differ on their opinions of how real the retirement is. Jorge Masvidal, John Jones threatened to vacate the title, saying do Jan versus Reyes for the interim belt. Or the vacant title, should he release it. And Sean O'Malley recently came out in support of being paid more to take on more difficult fights. These are fighters who are advocating for more pay for a difference in what they're doing. Masvidal fighting for the title, Jones moving up to heavyweight, and O'Malley fighting tougher, more experienced competition. These are fighters who are angling for more pay for what they perceive to be more risk on their ends. And frankly, I side with them.
It's very difficult to not side with the fighters in this case. I mean, Bloody Elbow did a fantastic job of uncovering a lot of the hidden financials. I mean, these are things that the MMA media was looking for a very long time. I think the closest glimpse we got into any sort of contracts previous to that was when Eddie Alvarez had his issue with Bellator and the UFC as far as what promotion had the rights to his services. So now we're at this point where we are calling into question the business structure of the UFC. Now, the way that Masvidal describes the negotiations seems pretty consistent with the way the UFC president Dana White responds to questions about this very topic. So there seems to be some level of consistency here. When you have Kevin Aioli of Yahoo Sports, he asked him at the press conference about why does he think that this is the case. All these fighters are complaining about pay. It turned into a 4 or 5 minute diatribe that did not answer the question, but was very good practice on how to use the F word. Like it's a very consistent thing here, and Dana has been very, very, very clear on this. You don't have to fight. However, that takes away all the space between two parties coming together to decide on mutually beneficial terms, and that's sort of what we're seeing. We're seeing these mutually beneficial terms not necessarily be mutually beneficial. Now, forgive me if we've gone over this before, but John Jones' case, for instance, where they where the example of Deontay Wilder and his $30 million guaranteed purse was used. Well, Dana White's saying, well, John Jones is the best of all time, but seems like there's a problem with the business structure. John Jones is a bigger draw than Deontay Wilder. Seems pretty logical that he should get the same amount, if not more money If the problem is that the UFC is not used to paying more than 18% of their revenue to the fighters, well, it seems to be a problem with the UFC. Now to have them now point to where, okay, the live gates are being taken away because of the pandemic, doesn't hurt the guaranteed money from ESPN, doesn't hurt the guaranteed money from all the other broadcast partners and the sponsorships and whatnot. And either way, as far as I know, the fighters never saw a bit of the gate money. Let's take a look back to some recent news. The NFL and EA Sports announced they were continuing their partnership for the Madden NFL games at the tune of $1.5 billion. $1 billion goes to the NFL. $500 million goes to the players. Now, when you have the UFC taking advantage of sponsorships, things like that, they have their own partnership with EA Sports. Be very surprised if the fighters got a third of that. We know the Reebok deal is coming to a close very soon. The Reebok deal also was one of the major flashpoints as far as fighter malcontent when it was announced. So I'm at this point, it should be very clear what's going on here. The fighters aren't getting paid enough money. And now we want to point to Jorge Masvidal saying he was getting offered less money to fight Usman than the Diaz fight. You know, even if you want to point to failures in management, if you want to point to whatever the case you want to point to in that, let's be clear on one thing: the BMF title, with these championship clauses, with the amount of money that goes into a champions fight, the UFC created a BMF title. He has UFC, well, it's not gold, but he has UFC medal around his waist that they deemed was a championship that fulfilled whatever obligations they had to put a title fight on the top of a pay-per-view. So why are we now denying Masvidal champion pay? Because it's not a real title, but it wasn't a real title to begin with. So the point is that every step of the way that we go along here, the UFC is always picking and choosing when to do what it's supposed to do, or do it or not do what it's supposed to do. It's always picking and choosing whatever's advantageous to the promotion. However, we know businesses are going to operate to function for their own profit. That's fine. But the fighters, if they are true independent contractors, they are businesses in their own right. Therefore, they are going to operate to their best interest. And it's about time we're starting to see that. So I'm glued to the screen to see what's next. Jorge Masvidal, John Jones, Conor McGregor, if this retirement actually means anything. Sean O'Malley, who obviously is a star for the future that they're really looking toward. Keep in mind, this was a guy who, off the Contenders series, had his own T-shirts made. So obviously, the promotion has a serious leaning toward boosting him up. So if you got all these guys mad about pay, there's probably something wrong with pay. Just a thought.
Yeah, and the thing is now, given the UFC's business structure, they've put themselves in a very precarious position, so to speak. If fighters continue to hold out, if they continue to put pressure to the point where, as John Nash said, for Buddy Elbow, who's, again, been studying fighter pay since as long as I can remember, if they essentially perform a strike, because that's really what you're looking at in terms of the next level of this, is more and more fighters, more and more champions, popular fighters decide to not fight or hold out for better pay. The problem is that the UFC, as I've spoken about before, has always been on that franchise business model, has always been about how can we keep our fighter costs down, replicate this system, keep growing our brand, expand the brand, have fighters essentially be just cogs in a wheel. Doesn't matter who they are, we'll find new stars, we'll make new stars. They want to retire. It's Dana White's famous line: if they don't want to fight, they don't have to fight. They can sit out, they can retire. But that's their whole ideal. At 18% of revenue, which includes USADA, by the way, so that it's in terms of what the fighters actually see, it's much lower than that. Now they've accumulated an insane amount of debt from being purchased by Endeavor. They've, had to pay out the investors, as the New York Post reported. They paid out some, $300 million dividend to investors such as Mark Wahlberg and high profile investors that were part of the Endeavor buyout. They don't have the money now to switch from 18 to 15%. It's not that they've got their coffers full of cash and that they can make that change right away without any ramifications. They've, like many other successful businesses, stretched their cash and revenue to the limit so that people are getting paid, but they're not sitting on mountains and mountains of cash. They are leveraging it as much as possible. Originally, I think, for when Endeavor was going to go public before that all fell apart last year. So now, as fighters are clamoring for this 50-50 split, it may be the right, time for the fighters to get together, unionize, get that association together to actually get a fair revenue split. But my big question from a business perspective is, how does a debt-ridden UFC, whose credit rating has been downgraded twice since the pandemic, I don't know exactly the amount of debt, because it's obviously we don't have a full look into their books, but we're guessing it's around 4.5 to 5 billion, somewhere in that range, between Endeavor and what is on the UFC's books itself. How do you, flip that switch so you're giving another, 30% of the revenue now goes to fighters when you're already struggling for cash? I don't see a way out of this for the UFC if fighters make a giant push here, but I don't know how they're going to pull it off either, because they, again, have so many obligations that they have to adhere to at the moment.
The thing is, though, you don't have to necessarily meet the 50%. Like that's what they're starting from so far behind. 18% is nothing compared to most sports leagues. And then you look at the sponsorship payouts for Reebok. You see however a gazillion different liquor companies plastered on the octagon, and they see zero from that, while their other sponsorships have been cut as a result. So, I mean, this is it's certainly a problem that Endeavor should be worrying about. It's something that Ari Emanuel might be beating his head against the wall. But at the same time, should the fighters really show mercy in this case? I think not. I mean, and in order to appease them, you don't necessarily have to go that full 50%. If you were to, let's think back to some of John Jones' specific words about the Deontay Wilder comparisons. At some point he said, the 30 million, or you're saying what Deontay Wilder pays, or even half. If you meet him at 15 million, still would be under what he should be getting paid, but still be a lot more than what he got paid. So there's definitely wiggle room here, and I think the fighters will accept something, even if they're still being shortchanged. It will be a great improvement if you go from 18 to 33%. I mean, the aforementioned NFL and EA Sports deal, a third of that went to the athletes. If a third of the ESPN broadcast money went to the fighters, would we be having this conversation? So there is a way for the UFC to just suck it up and make the fighters happy to an extent. Really, a lot of the debt issues and whatnot, it's not John Jones's fault. So him and Jorge Masvidal and Gray Maynard, quite honestly, they really shouldn't give a damn. Just my take on the matter. Mike, what do you got to say on this one?
Right. So just first and foremost, I think what you were saying, if the UFC were to increase the amount of revenue that the fighters were taking home in any way, shape, or form, even if they don't meet that 50%, that would be great. And obviously, it would be great for the guys like John Jones, Jorge Masvidal, Conor McGregor with his third retirement and since 2016. It would be obviously great for them because they'd be getting more money. They'd be being paid more than what they are, or more than they currently are, which is closer to what they're actually worth. But what that would be the best for is the fighters who aren't being paid, even John Jones money, to play on the Deontay Wilder money. The guys who are opening prelims, the guys who are signing to the UFC on their 4-fight short notice replacement deals, for the guys who have to work second jobs while they're in the UFC, even getting up to the top 15, having to work secondary jobs. Obviously, Jeff Neal, the most badass waiter in the world. These are the guys who an increased revenue share would help the most. So I think that's very important. Second, we touched on the problems facing the UFC and their inability to kind of come to the negotiating table on this issue from a debt standpoint. Obviously, the Endeavor debt and any outstanding UFC's debt. Those two things are going to prevent the UFC from giving a larger share to the fighters, outside of obviously the UFC wants to make the most money the UFC can. So they're not going to come to the table on that count. But one thing that I would like to say about the fighters is an all-out strike or anything close to that nature may not be as possible as we think. Obviously, in MMA, paydays outside of the UFC are very rare, few and far between. So there's always someone who's willing to come in and take the existing money that's going out, the existing 18%, because for that fighter, it's their biggest payday of their lives and reliable income. Even though it's not what they're worth being paid. But I think the bigger point is that with the ESPN deal, where the UFC gets a guaranteed amount of revenue for all of their shows, especially the pay-per-views, the fighters are really insulated from how much leverage they have. Back in the day, if we go back to, say, 2016, 2015, a fighter's worth was everything. Conor McGregor was Conor McGregor because he could move units, he could sell pay-per-views, and that was generating massive income for the UFC, who otherwise had a very volatile scale as far as how much the pay-per-view was going to make. I mean, we've seen some pay-per-views that are not cracking big numbers in recent days, but even more so back then before the ESPN guarantee. With the ESPN guarantee, the UFC is able to make a benchmark amount of money for every event. So the individual fighters and how big of a draw a fighter may be is unfortunately something that matters less and less as we look at the new deal.
Yeah, they definitely have lost some leverage with the guaranteed money. But if you have them coming together, and that's a very key thing, and especially the star athletes. Now, of course, as we saw when there was this mad scramble at the start of the pandemic to get people to fill up, cars, no matter where they were going to be, and it was that open call that was put out to managers and on social media that they're trying to find fighters. There'll be people willing to step in, but it took a long time to build a John Jones. It took a long time to build a Jorge Masvidal. Like it took time, and it took the right circumstances. And what will happen is the promotion will literally have to just start over. Which, you're gonna have fight fans watching fights, but you're not gonna have the casual interest, which is what the UFC is always after, because that's where the real money starts coming in. I do think that too, that we need to make a clear distinction here, and of course, without us knowing exactly what's on the books for Endeavor or the UFC as its own separate entity, let's be clear that there is and this is a tactic that we see in big business a lot. There's a big difference between losing money and not making as much profit. And that, I think, is the fine line that gets played with here when we hear promotional speak without any sort of documentation to back anything up. So just want to throw that out there. Any last thoughts on this topic before we move it along, fellas?
I guess the only thing I would say lastly on this is, I mean, you're both right in terms of it's not the fighter's fault. This is on UFC and Endeavor, and the UFC is much more insulated than they have been ever before in terms of actual fighter pay and negotiation and leverage that they have. But with that being said, I do find it interesting that for two reasons. One, that, as John Nash pointed out, and as you can kind of see with Masvidal, ESPN will get upset if they don't have big stars and big names and they're not getting the ratings or the pay-per-view buys they want. So you could kind of see where Masvidal essentially got a platform after UFC 250 to just talk about fighter pay on SportsCenter. They're already trying to get him back to the table with UFC. They've had him on several ESPN shows. I mean, they don't want him to just go away and lose him. That's already kind of a crack in terms of that partnership, where UFC might be insulated for the term of that duration, but if they don't keep ESPN happy, they're not going to get re-upped, and that's going to be far worse for them. And then secondly, as you mentioned, Ant, you're completely right in terms of the difference between profit and loss. But another big issue that companies have been doing, specifically Endeavor, is so much of them have tried to do these leveraged buyouts where they, just pile on unnecessary debt. That's what happened when they bought the UFC. They took a $1.5 billion Goldman Sachs loan they didn't need just to bring the debt up so that less of their own money was in, because then when they go public and they, are able to sell their stock, they're going to get way more money rather than investing all of their money into the company. And then they have to make up not only what they've invested off of their stock price. Instead, they borrow it from the banks so that they can make more profit in general. So as we go into this, a lot of companies, as we've seen in 2019 in the business world, WeWork specifically might be the biggest one. Their value plummeted to nothing, and they were leveraged to the bone. And so you looked at massive layoffs. Their valuation dropped something like $8 billion or something like that. It just complete decimation. If Endeavor, especially during the pandemic, they're all live events. They have so many live event properties. If they have to give up any money at this point, it's one of those things where you wonder where Endeavor goes. As John Nash said, UFC is fine. They're going to be fine no matter what. But Endeavor, the longer this goes on, the more and more likely it gets Endeavor gets in some real financial trouble. And if Endeavor happens to go bankrupt, then the big question is what happens to the UFC and their fighters? So it's
come save the day. That's my prediction.
They're in trouble too. They had to lay off people at their station casinos. They're not doing great. So
I guess we're all screwed.
Yeah.
Support the fighters. That's all.
Yes. Yes, of course.
All right, so let's move on from here. UFC 250 took place last night. Amanda Nunes in the main event defends her featherweight title this time against Felicia Spencer in seriously one of the most dominant, just thorough beatdowns that we've seen in a title fight for quite some time here, at least for a successful defense. Now let's go ahead and break some of this down here, because now we're at a very strange place with Amanda Nunes. She's cleaned out essentially the bantamweight division. There's a few people emerging now that might make sense in the future, but nothing that really jumps out and says, oh, we need to see this fight. The featherweight division, she's cleaned out both fighters in that. So now let's see here now. What's next for Amanda Nunes, the consensus greatest female fighter of all time?
I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea what could possibly be next for Amanda Nunes, because there are two categories for fights that Amanda Nunes could be involved in. There's the, she's already beaten her emphatically, and the, she's going to beat her emphatically. Amanda Nunes is someone who is virtually unparalleled insofar as what she's been able to do in the divisions that she is. I mean, I'm going to pull up the UFC rankings here. Now, we can deride the UFC rankings for what they are and how they're made and how much weight they hold, but let's take a look at the rankings. First of all, there are no women's featherweight rankings. So Amanda Nunes has cleaned out that division. Obviously, the Megan Anderson fight is still there, but if Anderson loses to Spencer, MMA math obviously doesn't work, but that's what we got going on at featherweight. And if you look at bantamweight, number 1 is Germaine Durandame. She's beaten her. Number 2 is Holly Holm. She's beaten her. 3 is Aspen Ladd. They have not fought. Ladd is a prospect definitely at this stage, number 3 in the division. So obviously that's a fight that could be made. Juliana Pena, Irene Aldana. And then you go down to Raquel Pennington, who she's already beaten. That rounds out the top 6. I mean, she's beating everyone they put in front of her, and she's doing it in ways that have people calling her the GOAT. And obviously, she's in that contention. I mean, when you look at not only the female fighters, but the male fighters, her resume stands up there. Now, you can argue whether or not the strength of the division or her strength of competition allows her to break into that next level. But this is someone who's going out there and destroying everyone they put in front of her. What's next for Amanda Nunes? I'm not sure. Maybe if she wants to stay at 145, that Megan Anderson fight. Obviously, Chris Cyborg's away in Bellator, but that rematch would have been my pick for the next fight. If you look at bantamweight, I guess Aspen Ladd's the highest ranked fighter who has not fought Amanda Nunes yet. So maybe that fight. But honestly, I have no idea. Who does she fight? I mean, the trilogy with Shevchenko's there, but now Shevchenko's down at 125 and Nunes is up at 145. So you see from the beginning the size disparity that's been there. I have no idea what to do with Amanda Nunes next. She's too good.
So, Pat, I'm going to float something over to you that was suggested in the post-fight press conference. I can't quite make any sense of it, but you're a smarter man than me. Maybe you can. Dana White proposed that Weili Zhang would make more sense than a third Shevchenko fight. Weili Zhang, 115-pound champion. Pat, really?
No, not really. No, this is Dana White trying to milk everything he can out of Weili Zhang. And Weili Zhang fan. I like Weili Zhang. I love what she's done for the division. But if you look at the rankings, I know Michael said we could berate the rankings and he kind of skipped over it, but I'm going to go ahead and berate the rankings because of the pound for pound rankings. Weili Zhang is ahead of Valentina Shevchenko, which is just makes no sense. I'll tell you exactly what's next for Amanda Nunes, and it is Valentina Shevchenko 3. You want to talk about how dominant Nunes has been? There's no question. I mean, she's beaten Shevchenko twice, which we'll get back to because that second one a little but, other than that, she's cleared out the division. She's cleared out both 145, 135. There's no one left for her up there. Then you look at Shevchenko. Tell me if either of you can give me one round that Shevchenko has looked like she's lost since she went to flyweight, I will be in awe because I can't think of a single round where she even looked remotely in trouble. And that includes her fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, which she just really easily beat. It was a joke almost in terms of a fight. So let's go back to Nunes versus Shevchenko 2. Very close fight. According to MMA decisions, split perfectly. 10 gave it to Nunes, 10 gave it to Shevchenko, and 2 gave it a draw. By far, the closest fight Amanda Nunes has had since she's gotten the bantamweight belt. And really, at this point, I think the only person that could give her any sort of competition. I don't see Aspen Ladd giving her trouble. I don't see Irene Aldana giving her trouble. I don't see anyone at bantamweight or Megan Anderson at featherweight. I don't see it. I think pretty much the only person that could challenge her and the only person that's arguably beat her since she got that belt is Valentina Shevchenko. Meanwhile, Shevchenko could do Weili Zhang. I know that Dana White's kind of teased that fight, but 115 has plenty of legitimate contenders that Zhang needs to get through first. I think you've got 2 champions in 2 divisions that have destroyed their competition. Let them fight again.
Yeah, I'm down for that third fight as well.
I'm going to push back on the third fight. I'm going to push back on the third fight. Like, to be quite honest, I can't remember what I scored the Shevchenko and Nunes rematch as. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I think I was leaning toward Nunes in that, but either way, wasn't exactly a barn burner of a fight. That's not nothing about that scream. I need to see this again. Second, Nunez has always had trouble making 135. Why force the issue to defeat somebody she's defeated twice? And obviously, we see that Shevchenko wasn't as great as she was at 135. She is a true flyweight, and that's where she belongs. So why compromise her? Why compromise Nunes to make something happen that we've already seen twice? And then also too, how about Nunes just sit down for a second? If she doesn't retire, I think if she retired right now, perfect send off. She can just walk away, defended both belts as a double champion. She is, in my opinion, she is the female MMA Mount Rushmore and knocked out the other 3. So I don't really see the point in her continuing if she doesn't necessarily have any challenges that make any sense. Unless there's big money involved. I definitely don't need to see Shevchenko again. But how about this? How about she just sit down? Her wife Nina Ansaroff is pregnant right now. They're looking forward to a daughter in the next, I think, 3 or 4 months. Let her go ahead and enjoy parenthood for a little bit. Let the division play out. Macy Chisholm is out there. Aspen Ladd is out there. Irene Aldana. Let these ladies fight in whatever combination you can get them in, and let a true contender emerge. And if that seems attractive enough, then let Amanda Nunes put down the dirty diapers, jump out in the octagon, and get it on. But I don't think it's necessary to run back a third Shevchenko fight.
Right. And if I may, I know this kind of goes against my entire ethos where I'm kind of the guy who's like, oh, don't do the BMF title because it's not a real belt. Like, don't relax with the interims. I'm very much in favor of sport rather than spectacle. But I'm gonna get a little weird here. All right. So bear with me. What if the PFL, who is now on ESPN and ESPN Plus and is suspended their 2020 season due to coronavirus fears, what if they in the UFC come to an agreement and we get Amanda Nunes, Kayla Harrison, the 155-pound champion from PFL? She won the tournament last year. Let's have some fun. They're teammates at ATT. If they're willing to make that fight, I think that's the biggest super fight you can have, over 125 pounds in the female divisions. Let's get weird.
I mean, I'd be on board to watch it, but PFL doesn't want to see Kayla Harrison go out there and get washed.
Oh, of course.
Like,
Yeah.
The promotion right now is built on her back as far as star power is concerned. Ray Selfo ain't trying to see her get demolished like that, because that's exactly what would happen. Nunez will wipe the floor with her. 10-pound difference be damned. But I like where your head's at. That's creative thinking. As long as you didn't say Amanda Nunes versus Clarissa Shields, we're good.
Yeah, I'm gonna. By the way, Derek Chisora just said he wants to fight in Bellator, so that's a boxing MMA transition. But yeah, I'm definitely a fan of MMA fighters fighting in MMA. Everyone else is welcome, but yeah, I'm an MMA guy.
Yeah. Like, just let the sports just like. I'm not trying to see LeBron score a touchdown. Sorry, like.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Although I will say again. I watch it. Yeah, exactly. I watch it. And I will say, when we're talking about contenders at 135, Shevchenko has only lost to one woman at 135 in the UFC. She lost to Liz Caramouche back very early in her career in 2011, I think. But other than that, she's undefeated at 135, and her name is Valentina. I know it wasn't the most exciting fight. I'm never gonna turn on Shev versus Nunez 2 and be like, all right, here we go, action all day. But it was, but it's to me, it's the only competitive matchup. As Mike said, in terms of competition, I don't see anyone else giving Nunez any sort of trouble. I think Shev is the one that could give her the most. Might be a boring fight, but if you talk about the spirit of competitiveness, I don't know who you would put above Shev as a better contender for Nunez.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this though. I do think that the UFC's featherweight division, women's featherweight division, should just be done away with after last night. Like, do we really want to see Megan Anderson get her consciousness rearranged? No. Is there any other women's featherweight on the roster? No. So why are we doing this? Just it makes absolutely zero sense. At this point, I think it just does the sport a disservice for the UFC to continue having a featherweight division, because at least if a couple of these ladies went to Bellator, at least you have like a real division going on there, and the fans can enjoy some level of action. The presence of the female featherweight division in the UFC just seems to be to spite Bellator, if anything else. Like that seems to be the only purpose it serves, and experiment over with. We get it. All right.
I'd say it's that and a marketing tool, because she's the last champ left. So
yeah,
but yeah, I'm with you 100%. It doesn't need to exist.
Just let it go, man.
Yeah.
Let it go. All right. So of course we had a bantamweight champion fighting last night, but we had what should have been a bantamweight title fight going on last night. And we had bantamweight contender fights going on last night. We had bantamweight prospect fights going on last night. The bantamweights showed out for UFC 250. Very entertaining stuff all around. Now it looks like Aljamain Sterling is, I mean, granted, he should have already been the number one contender, but here he is. Now he is officially next in line for the winner of Peter Yan versus Jose Aldo for the vacant bantamweight title. Fellas, are we feeling this? Are we feeling Aljo here? Am I alone on an island right now?
Well, I'm sorry. I'm not on that island with you. I think Aljo looks phenomenal. I think he's by far the number one contender. Again, I'm with you in terms of I think it should have been Aljo versus Yan for the belt over Aldo. I love Jose Aldo, but he lost, however close. You want to talk about the ramifications of a close split decision loss, and he gets a title fight. We'll see. I hope it's a good fight, but I think it's more about selling than anything else. So I think Aljo should have been against Yan for the belt in the first place. That being said, Yan to me just looks too much like a monster. Ever since I first saw him come in the UFC, and a little before that too, he's always looked like a prospect that just keeps getting nastier and nastier in terms of his ability to just march people down, throw just extremely aggressive, throw crazy amount of significant strikes, do damage. I think Aljo is going to be a great test for him, and I'm not saying Aljo can't win because I think it's going to be a close fight, but if I had to put money on someone, I'd say Yan just because he's looked like an absolute monster. But that being said, I'm super excited for that fight, and props to Aljo, and if I'm wrong and he wins, then he's proved me wrong before, so who knows? I think it's going to be an extremely fun bantamweight fight. I'm glad that we're getting it. We'll see. I really think it could go down as one of the best bantamweight fights in history. Knock on wood here, but we'll see how it goes. Personally, though, I have Yan. I think he's just too good.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of no disrespect to Jose Aldo, but just kind of dismissing his chances, which isn't fair. I mean, like, he shouldn't be in this fight, but he has a very real chance of winning this fight. So let's throw that out there. But now, as far as Aljamain Sterling is concerned, Michael, I'm going to pivot to you on this one. Do you agree with me, or are you wrong? Aljamain Sterling is the rightful number one contender.
Well, that's a tough one. I will tell you that I am on your island. It may be Fight Island over in Abu Dhabi.
Don't
with
jump now.
115-degree weather. I am on your island, and I'm with you. I'm on the Aljamain Sterling train. I mean, that guy is amazing. But yeah, let's go back to this. What a night for the bantamweights at UFC 250. You've got the Sugar Show, Sean O'Malley, with one of the best walk-off knockouts we've ever seen. Done. Period. End of sentence. Then you've got Cody Garbrandt with one of the best knockout walk-off KOs we've ever seen. Boom. End of story. He looks great, back to his championship form. Then you've got, and let's not forget, Alex Perez with a calf kick KO over Jussier Formiga. That's a massive win for him. Just a terrific win for that bantamweight as well. And then obviously the Aljamain Sterling win, the submission over Corey Sandhagen. I'm with you, Ant. Let's get Sterling versus Yan for the belt. But I think one guy that we have neglected to mention, and I think that's a failing as far as how important and how good he is and how pivotal to the division, and that's Marlon Moraes. This is someone who's knocked out Aljamain Sterling. So his only recent loss was to Cejudo for the belt. I think the fight that should be happening is Yan versus Moraes. That's the fight that was scheduled for Kazakhstan before COVID took over and Cejudo retired. So I'd like to see Yan versus Moraes, and the winner gets Aljo, rather, not Aldo. So yeah, that's basically where I stand on the issue. I think if they're going to do Yan versus somebody and it's not Moraes, let's do Aljamain Sterling. But if you look at Aljo's resume, I mean, he has got to be the number one contender for the belt when the next fight comes around.
Definitely good points there said by both, except for you, Pat. We disagree with. Now, let's go ahead and keep talking.
Wait. Just to clear that up, were you saying Aljo was the number one contender, or Aljo was going to win?
Aljo was the number one contender.
Oh, then we're on the same island. My bad. I thought it was Aljo going to win the whole belt.
Very easy.
But Mike, you see that, right? You saw, like, we convinced him. He knew what he was, and then he tried to.
No, of course.
I see what you're doing.
And it's okay. That's the point of a discussion.
We're just very convincing men. So
just for that, Marlon Moraes is the number one contender. Keep going, though.
Valid case.
One think I have to convince either one of you on is that Sean O'Malley is the real deal. Like this is very, very serious. Knocking out Eddie Wineland, the inaugural WEC champion. I think one of the lighter weight class fighters that doesn't get his due credit. I think history is going to look back on his career a lot more fondly than some fans do now. But to be able to handle Eddie Wineland like that, the setup with the feinted uppercut to the cross, beautiful stuff right there. What do you want to see next for Sean O'Malley?
I mean, now this is terrible because you do need to convince me that Sean O'Malley is the real deal. And here's why. O'Malley's amazing in terms of the people he's fought so far. But let's remember where Eddie Wineland is right now in his career, right? I mean, he will always go down, as you said, as one of the most underrated fighters. He's not going to get enough credit where credit is due. But this is also a guy that, you know, with the O'Malley loss, is 1-3 in his last 4. His last win was against Grigory Popov, who hasn't really turned out to be the type of prospect that the UFC had hoped for. And then before that, he had dropped fights to Alejandro Perez and John Dodson. His last win before Popov was Takeya Mizugaki, who I believe just retired recently. So again, I think O'Malley is the real deal, but I don't think I'd like to think that, I suppose, but I don't think he's been tested enough yet. I don't think you give him that KO over Wineland and you say, okay, he's there, he's ready to go, it's all good. I think right now you need O'Malley against a top 15. I think that's the real test. If he does something like that to anyone in the top 15, even if it's number 15, if it's a more established name, then I'm 100% on board. He is the real deal. But I mean, it's one of those things where it's hard to see if you look at O'Malley's resume. It's not like he's gone through a bunch of ripe up-and-coming contenders who are really, you know, people to be feared in the division. You had Andre Sukumtoth, you have Wineland. He had he's had amazing performances. But I'm not 100% convinced that he's there yet. Give me one real current test in the top 15 or a prospect that's really on the rise, and I am 100% bought in and sold. But I can't give it with Wineland's recent career struggles. You know, I can't quite give it to him yet.
All right, so Mike, I'm going to toss you a different question now. Is Cody Garbrandt back? Is the former bantamweight champion once again a threat for the title?
Yeah, I definitely think that Cody Garbrandt's back, and obviously there are flaws in his striking and flaws in his overall game that go beyond just, oh, he gets emotional, bites down on the mouthpiece, and gets into brawls. There are some structural issues there, and that's one of the reasons why he's losing fights, in addition to the emotional counterpart, which I believe is 100% accurate. But like we see with the patient Justin Gaethje, a patient Cody Garbrandt is a terrifying individual. I mean, Rafael Assunção will go down as one of the most underrated fighters in the sport's history. And Garbrandt just, I mean, there's no other way to say it. He detonated that right hand on him. I think Garbrandt's immediately back in the title mix, especially given the way the UFC views him as a commodity. Obviously, very big fan base for Garbrandt, lots of attention on him. So, yes, I do think he's back, and I think he can make waves in the division once again. And, of course, one of the most exciting fighters on the roster, so absolutely someone to tune in. Pat, I do have an answer for you on Sean O'Malley's next fight. By the way, I am sold. I am on that train. I'm on that bus on the highway. I am on the bandwagon for Sean O'Malley. John Dodson, let's have him fight. John Dodson ranked 13th in the current rankings, and Dodson's one of these guys who is the perennial test. I mean, you'll remember he was the big step up for Peter Yan. He was the big step up for Nathaniel Wood. This is a guy who the UFC is content to use as the wily veteran to the upcoming untested prospect. And I think O'Malley made a statement with that win over Wineland. It was, I am here. I'm ready to go. Let's continue to give him step ups, give him someone like Dodson. I'm also content to see him fight some of the other guys at the bottom of the division, or excuse me, the bottom of the rankings, like Chito Vera, Song Yadong. Those are really exciting fights. Now, I tend to lean away from the young gun versus young gun and let the prospects build. But obviously, yes, definitely in favor of another step up for Sean O'Malley.
And then also too, let's factor in he might have pissed off Dana with his demands for more pay. So we might end up seeing him with a really tough matchup. We might see him against, I don't know, a Jimmy Rivera or somebody like that who's a lot more experienced and presents a lot of stylistic nightmares. So I'm very curious as to what the UFC is going to do with him next. But he's definitely someone that we need to be paying attention to in the future.
O'Malley. I think a really fun fight would be O'Malley versus either the winner or the loser of Ray Borg and Merab Dvalishvili.
I'm not mad at that.
Good. I personally would love to see O'Malley versus Dominic Cruz. I think that would be a heck of a fight to see where Cruz is at. You know, he came back, obviously struggled against Cejudo a little bit, but you know, let's see if he's still got it. And that's a real step up for O'Malley. So I kind of like that wily veteran versus young prospects. Let the young eat the old, or the old eat the young. That's
but at that point, if he were to beat Dominic Cruz, even if it were a close decision or something like that, you can't dial it back at that point. At that point, then it's like, okay, you're a number one contender fight after that. You can't go backwards. So you know what? Maybe.
Yeah, I know.
No. Here's one that's going to mess y'all up here. And this is probably going to fire off the comments. Uriah Faber.
Ooh, I don't know. That's the thing, though.
Stylistic nightmare, older guy.
Yeah.
Star power.
That could be a fight.
Well, no. I mean, Frankie Edgar. He's talking about making that 135 debut.
But again, Frankie's so close to the top because he's coming down as an active 145 contender.
Yeah.
That you get kind of that Cruz scenario where if he wins, now he's a top 10 guy, period.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But dude, I hope things go well for O'Malley. He's a really fun fighter to watch. I mean, his striking is masterful. And what little grappling we've seen from him, obviously he competed at Quintet Ultra, amazing event, and he looked sensational. I mean, he was snatching that front headlock. I mean, he looked good. But yeah, O'Malley's a really fun fighter, and I can always get behind someone who's streaming Fortnite and Warzone because I'm a degenerate.
You with my Warzone skills because I'm super trash. All right, fellas. Now we just took a trip earlier to my island, but we got to talk about Fight Island. And according to reports from Globo, that Fight Island is Yaz Island in Abu Dhabi. We've been done this, man. Have we been hoodwinked? Have we been bamboozled? Have we been run amok? Do you feel gypped if Fight Island is actually Yaz Island? Pat, I'm going to start with you.
No, I don't feel gypped. I'm pretty sure that the last time we were on this show, we talked about it, and I said that it was probably that island out in Abu Dhabi. I'd have to go back and watch the tape, but I'm pretty sure that rumors were already swirling it was Yaz Island. It makes sense. That's where they held UFC 242. That's UFC already has a standing agreement with Abu Dhabi's tourism board for 5 years worth of fights coming to the nation of Abu Dhabi and being hosted there for a set amount of revenue. Of course, it's the only thing that made sense. Especially, we talked about earlier in the show, we talked about how the UFC does not have money to spare based on everything going on and the debt they've leveraged. They're not going to go out and buy an island while all of their fighters are complaining about pay. I mean, they may do that, but not in this case. in this case, they're actually so cash strapped and they're trying to get as much money as they can to Endeavor that, of course, they're going to use the island where they already have a set deal, contract negotiated, done for, set in place. It's, I think maybe they will end up releasing some new T-shirts with the trademarks they got. I think they'll maybe add some, marketing ploys here and there. Maybe they'll add a couple palm trees. Who knows? But I'm not hoodwinked at all. I saw this coming from a mile away.
I mean, it's the whole concept was so ridiculous that I'm disappointed that it's so regular. That's the really disappointing part. In combat sports, we continually embrace the ludicrous. We with open arms, any sort of foolishness, we just, all right, just come on in, and we deal with it, and we treat it like it's a serious topic every time we do one of these videos, every time we write an article. So now that we finally were just running head first into pure Carnival Barker territory, now it's just regular old Yaz Island. I'm sorry. I'm very disappointed. Mike, please talk me off a ledge. Am I being crazy right now? Am I being go ahead, take it away, man.
Yeah, I think the palm tree t-shirts and the fact that you could have an octagon on the beach, crystal clear water all around you, the fighters finish, and then there's a medical tent with a luau outside. We were sold Fight Island, but we're not getting Fight Island. We're getting an island where there are fights. And I think that's a big distinction, but I don't think it matters. Because honestly, who are we to complain when we get to see more fighters competing and, for all we know, more often? I personally, I was never infatuated with the Fight Island gimmick. I always thought it was just, that's a way to get around regulations, so that works.
You're breaking Ant's heart right now. You're breaking his heart, but go on.
I'm not a Fight Island guy.
Of course, it was a get around regulations. We knew this, but if you were going to do that, make it ridiculous. I wanted Shane Sung to be in a throne on the side of the octagon. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wanted like the all the ghouls and stuff from Outworld to be in the audience. I wanted like Jim Kelly with the afro. I wanted some pure island martial arts activity, and now we're just getting old Yaz Island, which, hey, I would love to go to Yaz Island because Abu Dhabi seemed like it's a dope spot to vacation. But I wanted like the water in between rounds. I wanted it to be served from coconuts. Is this too much to ask?
If I remember correctly, what was that hashtag that you kept throwing out there?
Yacht in international waters. So my dream has been crushed. Okay. This and like, I'm definitely a purist when it comes to this. And of course, you guys know all the rants and raves I'll go on about stuff like that, about keeping sporting integrity. But this was the one time where it's just like, whatever, the world's ending. We want to see people punch each other for money. Okay.
And kick.
Throw it on yeah, and elbow and knee. Yes. So so we wanted to see this, and you promised the Fight Island, knowing the imagery that would spark up in people's brains. The branding already has that sort of theme to it, so they knew what they were doing. We just got fooled, man, and I feel cheated.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would have loved to see. I forget who threw it out there, but imagine they had special VIP packages so that you could. Yeah. Yeah. And so imagine that, they had special VIP packages. You go out there, be a part of it. Imagine you had, you'd see one fight of the night taking place on the beach, another on a yacht, another in a different locale as the background with different fans all around, have tiki torches, fight at night. Would it, do an Ultimate Fighter house on Fight Island where you've just got them living there.
Coming back.
A little uncomfortable with the tiki torches now, but that's a whole nother topic. But it's one of those things. It's one of those things where I think this is granted. We should be relieved as far as us being like serious media members and very seriously discussing the issues surrounding the sport. We should be relieved about this. But at the same time, I think this is another example of the UFC shooting itself in the foot when it comes from a marketing standpoint, where this dedication to the brand as we see it, and not actually just having fun with it, succeeding in spite of itself. This is an example that I've thrown out there a million times. But when the UFC returned to Japan for, I believe it was UFC 144, instead of just presenting the UFC product as it normally is, why not have the blue pride gloves? Why not have the white floor on the cage? Just something to mix things up. Think about the sense of relief there was to watch the UFC's 25th anniversary show in Denver, and to see the old school graphics. Just that little change, made it feel like something fresh, something exciting, and kind of takes the monotony out of that weekly grind of watching these 7-hour events and over and over again. So to have a concept with the potential of pure lunacy like Fight Island, and then to say, oh no, it's just going to be a regular UFC fight. Come on, fam. We're wasting golden opportunities here.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, with everything going on with the pandemic, I think it's probably good that we're in a more regulated environment from that standpoint. But I'm with you. I mean, especially, and who knows? Maybe they've gotten a lot of trademarks. They could end up doing something different with the cage floor. They could add some of those things in. But yeah, it is a little disappointing to see. Although I'm not sure how much more money they would have made if they had done all of that, right? Unless you're selling those VIP packages where you're bringing people out there and they're spending ridiculous amounts of money to go do that. I mean, in terms of the media rights and the ratings, I think maybe you get a slight boost, but they've already got a huge boost from just the fact that they're the only sport in there right now. So we'll see what they do, but it's saving them a ton of money to just use an already negotiated contract venue rather than trying to buy an island, as much as I would have loved that.
So boring, Pat. So boring. Thank you for the boredom. Mike, anything you'd like to say?
No, I'm all good. As long as I get to see some of these foreign fighters competing, I'm happy. The venue, I agree with you. I agree that having an Enter the Dragon setup would be amazing. I agree that there's a lot you can do to break up monotony and a lot you can do with the amount of rights that the UFC has from other promotions to do these kinds of fun things. I'm totally with you on that point. But for me, Fight Island is just a place to hold fights. So I'm not too gypped there.
Boring. Y'all boring, man. So just think about this. The only times that at least I can think of off the top of my head, besides the graphics being changed for the Denver 25th anniversary event,
and UFC 200 with the yellow cage.
Yes, yeah. The yellow cage, the cage looked like somebody peed on it. It looked terrible. and then it was it was the second, I can't remember the number of the event, but it was the headline was Cruz Faber 2, and they had the Bud Light Lime cage.
199?
No, that was 199.
Oh, that was 3. My apologies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so the cage floor had the Bud Light Lime logo instead of the blue Bud Light logo, and Bud Light Lime was disgusting. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. Thank you. This is the Body Lock. Like, subscribe, share, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. So for Pat Auger, for Mike Fiedel, I'm Anthony Walker. Stay beautiful, stay positive, stay sexy. I'll see you when I see you. Peace.